So we have these 3 columns that get kind of auto resized as we are on large devices or small devices. And then the rows that we have will also go in and collapse beneath as we get smaller and smaller. And so this is a pretty cool little system. And so just to kind of show how it works, I'm going to go in and just create 9 different things. And so I'll create 3 different rows of 3 different objects. And then maybe rather than, so maybe just to lay it out a little different, I'm just going to put in some numbers here, but for fun, let's do it in Portuguese. So that's number 1. And then we'll have, I'm just going to try and get this so you can see a little more compact. So I'm going to bring these up. And then we'll have, instead of, we have dois, or dois, depending on if you're, if you're truly Portuguese or if you're Brazilian up from the north, you put that shush on it, so dois. And we have trace, okay, very familiar to many of you. And then I'm going to create a new row. So then a div class, let me just make this a little more clear. So div, and so this will be class, another row. And then within that row, we'll create 3 more columns. So div, class, and this one will be a column. And then we're going to have cuatro, spelled with a Q. Div. I'm hoping I'm right, by the way. I've been trying to learn Spanish. My kids are in Spanish immersion, so I've been trying to learn Spanish, and now I struggle to count in Portuguese. And then cinco, same, right? Div as Spanish, I mean. Class equals call, and then we have seis. You can have a little sh on the end of that as well too if you want to. Seis. Okay. And then I'll do one more. Div class equals row, and then I'm going to create 3 more columns. So div class equals column, and then we, instead of ocho, we have oito. And then another div class equals call, and we have novi instead of nueve. We have novi. Wait, I was skipping a number. Oh yes, how could we forget? Come back up here. Div class, we forgot sechi. One of the best numbers. Okay, so call, and we got sechi. All right, so we've got these different numbers, which is really just to get some text on the screen. And then let's run this, and we're going to see these numbers laid out on the screen. Okay, perfect. So we've got the 3 columns still because we've just indicated their columns. And by the way, if I put in so let me on the last row put in another column. I'll add in our 10. So I'll put in another column here, class, call, and this is 10, which is days. Days, is it with an S? Probably with an S. Days. Forgetting my Portuguese. The recently returned Brazilian missionaries want to slap me. All right, so notice what it did on that last one. I put 4 columns in instead of 3, and so notice how it divided the page out differently based on the 4 columns. And as we shrink it, it moves in the same way, but it's done based on the number of columns. Now, going back to the Bootstrap grid system, it's a powerful 12-column system. Why 12 columns? Because of the way that 12 divides. So we can divide this site into thirds, which would give us 4 columns each. We can divide it into fourths, which would give us 3 columns each. We could divide it into half, which would give us 6 columns each. Or we can use the full 12 columns, or we could go 1 and if we wanted to go a third and 2/3, then we can start to use this system for the number of columns. So the way that we do that is I can come in here and I can say, this particular column for I only want to use 1 column. So call-1 is the class, or -1. Okay, I want dois to be the one that uses the majority of the stuff. So I'm going to give it 10 columns, and then tres I'm going to use one column. So I can define based on that 12. Now notice this adds up to 12. 10 plus 1 plus 1, right? So as I come in and do this, now it's going to take and it's going to allocate for that one column. Deutsch gets the majority of this page. Now currently it's left justified, so it's sitting on the left. And then we have Trace out here that's getting 1 column's worth of information. So notice as I lay this out, I can go put some menu over here and then have the bulk of the page be in this column and then have some little other menu on this side. Okay, I could say with these numbers, let's go whatever. Let's go. What do we want to do? Let's. What I'm thinking is let's take out a column for a second. That's really what I'm wanting to do, and say this one's going to get 3 columns. This one's going to get 9. Again, we're adding up to 12 here. If we go over 12, by the way, it'll just pop it down to the next row. But the goal is to decide how we're going to allocate this 12 columns that we have. So notice that in this case, Cuatro gets the first third of the information, and then Cinco is taking the other 9 of the columns, right? And so we can lay these out however we want to. Now, if we don't, we can do things like, I want this column to take up 6, and then you just figure out what to do with the other 3. We can leave it blank with the other columns, and it will divide the remaining columns between whatever space is left. And so in this case, the Sechi is going to get 6 columns. It's going to get half the page, and I've got margins and stuff in here too. But then between the other half, it takes and divides it up evenly between oito, novi, and days. I think it's actually a Z. The S does make the, no, because tres. All right, not important. Okay, so knowing that, and if you go look at this Bootstrap site, which is really helpful, it shows you the different codes. So this one, they have columns, and it has the small indicator. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But it's just dividing it up 3 different ways. So don't ignore the small. The small is saying, when the device is small, do this. And then we can add on a large and says, when the device is large, do this. And so we can actually have more customization into the process. But right now, I just want to focus on the columns. So here, notice that this code, they've taken this. There's just 2 columns in this row, and so it divides it evenly. There's 3 columns, so it divides it evenly. But then notice what they start to do in terms of saying, this class, 2 of 3, gets column 6, and then we'll split up the remaining distance between 1 and 3 on that row, right? In this case, column 5 is going to be, the 2 of 3 gets 5 columns, and then we divide up the remaining amount between those 2 columns that are in that particular row. And you could go through and look at all this, but it gives you different ways of doing it. In this case, we divided up this column with 8 of those 12 units, and then we get 4 of those units. So you get the point. But lots of different, and it shows you can mix and match. Just like we've done, you can do different things on different rows and lay this website out the way you want it to be laid out. So everything works in the world of Bootstrap in terms of rows and then the columns within that row, those rows. And as we add new rows, that information goes beneath the rows above, obviously. And if we get to a point where the information is too big for that particular space, which we'll see in the next video, then it'll take, even if it's in the same row, if we start shrinking the page down, whoops, where'd my page go? Not running. As we shrink it down, if trace becomes too small for the remaining space, then it will take and drop trace down to the next row before cuatro, because in the code, cuatro comes after trace. All right, so hopefully you're getting the feel for this. We'll talk about it more in the next video. Spencer out.